Before starting this video, I do want to give a thank you to my patrons that support the channel. And if you would like to support the channel, there are some great benefits for you in the link down below. So with that, let's get into today's video. What's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on Pup Stomp MTG. So with this video, I am going to go over Maelstrom Wanderer. I will say for a while now, I've been debating on making a Maelstrom Wanderer deck, and seeing this new art for the new Commander Masters set is absolutely amazing. I haven't been a big fan of a lot of the profile picture arts, but this one is absolutely incredible, giving a front-facing shot of the Maelstrom Wanderer. So I thought of making a video around Maelstrom Wanderer, kind of giving an idea what kind of direction you may want to go to, especially in 2023. This is a pretty old commander. Also, Commander Masters gave me a great excuse to talk about it, so let's read what it does. So it simply has creatures you control have haste, and it does have Cascade. So I will just say this on record, this is one of the most Timmy commanders you could play in Commander, but it's absolutely a blast. I mean, I haven't played it personally, I have played against it, and the opponent was just cascading like crazy, putting so much big creatures on the battlefield because it is 8 mana to cast. Also, to make this deck a little bit more spicy, I decided to add the companion Keruga the Macro Sage as a companion, mainly because we have a lot of big creatures we want to be playing. Keruga the Macro Sage has that ability. When she enters the battlefield, you draw a card for each permanent you control with mana value 3 or greater. And her companion restriction is your starting deck contains only cards with mana value 3 or greater and land cards. So I will say it's a little bit of a disadvantage because you're not allowed to put Soul Ring in the deck, but this does lead to a lot of creative ideas to put in the deck nonetheless. I will say a positive about that is you're not really going to whiff on Maelstrom Wanderer when you cascade into it, so you're going to be casting a lot of big creatures in the process because they're going to be 3 CMC or higher. So I will say that's the one benefit of having Keruga the Macro Sage as your companion. Obviously you don't have to have it as your companion, but I did want to add it in there just for a little bit of spice. Plus I do have to say I am a big art guy, so seeing Keruga the Macro Sage in that kind of art treatment is absolutely breathtaking. So if you decide for yourself you want to make Maelstrom Wanderer because of Commander Masters and you want to make Keruga the Macro Sage as your companion, here are some tips and ideas for you in your deck building process. So of course, first of all, you want to put as much creatures on the battlefield as you can. You want a big ramp package. We do have Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia, and Somberwald Sage. To be quite honest, Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia keeps on surprising me. You could add 2 mana of any combination of colors, and on top of that, whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, put a 1/1 counter on Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia, and untap it so that you can repeat the process, keep on casting big creatures. You can only spend the mana to cast creatures, but that's not a big deal because of course this is a creature heavy deck. I did also want to bring your attention to some other great cards in the deck like Shaman of the Forgotten Ways and Savala, Heart of the Wilds. Savala is just an absolute staple. If you're playing big dumb creatures on the battlefield, you could tap her and paying a green mana so that you could add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So you could easily put a big dumb creature on the battlefield just by tapping Savala just by herself, and on top of that, if that creature is bigger than any other creature on the battlefield, you get to draw a card. Savala is a great include in any big dumb creature deck you want to put in. I did also want to discuss some great options as far as cost reduction. So Shadow in the Warp is absolutely excellent. The first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. Also, this does what Gruul does best, and it hates on non-creature spells. Whenever our opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, Shadow in the Warp deals 2 damage to that player. In a similar fashion, we do have Goreclaw. It has that ability of creature spells you cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast, and on top of that, whenever it attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. So what's really nice about the Maelstrom Wanderer, say for example you have Goreclaw on the battlefield, you cost reduce it to 6 mana, so you play it on the battlefield, it'll get Cascade. Say for example you get 2 other big creatures on the battlefield and Goreclaw on the battlefield, all your creatures will get haste and trample because of Goreclaw and also your commander, so this is a great include. I did also want to discuss with you some of the great ways we could get value out of our big creatures. There's a lot of big creature spells that we want to focus on, so of course we do have to have the Great Henge. It is pretty expensive. It did get reprinted in the new Lord of the Rings set, but it didn't really reduce the price as much, but this is an absolute staple in any green deck and any big creature deck because this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control, and on top of that it does tap for 2 green mana and gains you 2 life. And if you're thinking we're done with that, no we're not. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. So it reduces its cost, gives you mana, and draws some cards. Absolute great value. And if we do have a lot of big creatures on the battlefield, we could utilize Rishkar's expertise and Return of the Wild Speaker. These essentially have the same ability of drawing cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. With Rishkar's expertise, you may cast a spell with mana value 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. That's great value by itself. And on top of that, Return of the Wild Speaker does have an overrun ability. With non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. You can only choose one or the other with Return of the Wild Speaker, but that really isn't too big of a downside because most likely we're going to be drawing so much cards off of Return of the Wild Speaker. Another card I do want to suggest is the Last March of the Ents. So for 8 mana, the spell can't be countered. That's just great by itself because if you spend a lot of mana on a spell, you want to make sure it can't get countered. You draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control, so kind of opposite from Return of the Wild Speaker and Rishkar's expertise where you're drawing based off the power. This one's based off the toughness. However, when you draw that many cards, you can put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield, including the ones that were already in your hand before drawing those cards. In many situations, I could see this as a game ender because if Maelstrom Wanderer is on the battlefield, all your creatures will have haste, and if you put a lot of creatures on the battlefield with a Last March of the Ents, you can just swing away for victory with a big dumb creature army. But that does bring me to my next point. What kind of big creature army do we want to throw at our opponents? There's a lot of different options, a lot of versatility throughout the options. So the first one I do want to suggest is Vorinclex. Just by itself, it does have trample and reach, and when it enters the battlefield you can search your library for 2 forest cards and put them in your hand. However, with this version of Vorinclex, you want to make sure you can flip it into the Saga, the Grand Evolution. It does have 3 busted lore chapters. For the first lore chapter, you mill 10 cards, put up to 2 creature cards from among milled cards onto the battlefield. For the second lore chapter, you distribute 7 1/1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. And for the last lore chapter, your creatures essentially gain, you can pay 1 mana, you can have this creature fight another target creature. Then after that third lore chapter, you will then flip Vorinclex back onto the battlefield, and then when it enters in the battlefield again, you will search your library for 2 forest cards and put them into your hand. This is going to do so much work for you, having so much versatility, essentially getting creatures on the battlefield, making them buffer, and also fighting them with other creatures on the battlefield. So this is such a fun include to add to the deck. Of course though, if you do have big creatures in your deck, you must include Kogla the Titan Ape. It has that ability of when it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So it does have a 7/6 body, so it's going to be killing a lot of things when it enters the battlefield. And when it does attack, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. And I will say 99% of the time, that third ability is kind of useless, so I'm not going to go over it too much. But because our commander does grant our creatures haste, we can get immediate value by destroying a target artifact or enchantment on the battlefield, and on top of that getting some removal. With that said, let's also double the power and toughness of our creatures with Zopandra Hunger Dominus. It does have reach, and at the beginning of each combat, so including your combat and your opponent's combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn, and it does have an ability where you could sacrifice 2 creatures and make it indestructible. So with this card, I am painting a scenario where you actually cascade into it with your commander at the beginning of your combat. You're going to double the power and toughness of your commander and Zopandra Hunger Dominus and whatever creature is on the battlefield, and they will all have haste, so your Maelstrom Wanderer will be a 14/10. That's absolutely busted with this card. And the last card I do want to mention in this section is Etali Primal Conqueror. This is one of my favorite commanders of the year because obviously it's a dinosaur. I love dinosaurs so much, but it has a stupid busted ability of when it enters the battlefield, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of spells from among those non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. And for 9 mana and a Phyrexian green mana, you can flip it into a Etali Primal Sickness where it has trample and indestructible. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they get that many poison counters. So you do want to think of it this way. This does have 1 less mana than the Maelstrom Wanderer, so you could possibly cascade into this. And if Etali enters the battlefield, you can get immense value out of stealing spells from your opponents, and you could also flip into some big creatures in your own deck, and they will all have haste because of Maelstrom Wanderer. So yeah, this is one of the most Timmy decks that I've ever seen, but it's absolutely fantastic. This is what got me into Commander in the first place, is big dumb creatures. However, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Maelstrom Wanderer. Is there another commander you'd like me to cover with the new Commander Master set? I know they're kind of older commanders, but I would love to go over some older commanders, so let me know down below in the comments which commanders would you like to see in a video. I will say what inspired me most to make this video is the new art for Maelstrom Wanderer, and also making a new companion with Karuga. So with that said, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.